Welcome to today's Explainer, everyone. So, today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating piece of history that quite literally reshaped the entire landscape of the American government. We're going to explore how the Civil War permanently shifted power in the United States and totally redefined the relationship between the individual states and the Union as a whole. If you've ever wondered why our national government operates the way it does right now, well, the answers are rooted right here in this exact historical turning point. But before we get into the hard historical facts, I want you to just take a second and think about this incredibly powerful scripture from Mark 3:25. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. It is literally the perfect visual metaphor for the United States during this era. Imagine the entire nation as just one single house. Leading up to the Civil War, the states inside that house were pulling in completely opposite directions. And that deep, deep division, it was totally unsustainable. Something had to give. And when the dust finally settled, the very foundation of that house was permanently altered. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start off with a house divided, then move on to what the war proved, discuss how power shifted, look at why this matters today, and finally we'll wrap up with education and biblical morality. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, a house divided, setting the stage for conflict. To really grasp the massive impact of the Civil War, we absolutely have to understand the concept of federalism. In a nutshell, federalism is the balancing act of power between the national, or federal government, and the individual state governments. It's kind of like a giant seesaw. And here's a fun fact for you. Before the war, the federal government was actually so small that most citizens only ever interacted with it at their local post office. The seesaw was heavily tilted in favor of the states making their own rules, with the national government taking a major backseat in most local matters. Moving on to Section 2, what the war proved, the final verdict on secession. If you're taking notes right now, here is the big question you need to ask yourself. When this grueling, tragic war finally came to an end, what did it actually prove about a state's right to just leave the country? Could a state just pack up its bags and walk away from the Union whenever they disagreed with where the nation was heading? Well, the answer is a resounding, absolute no. The Union victory definitively established that secession is illegal, period. States could not legally secede from the Union, meaning the country would remain one single, undivided nation. Remember that divided house we just talked about? Yeah, it was going to stay standing together, whether the individual states liked it or not. The whole concept that a state could just sort of opt out of the United States was completely dismantled right there on the battlefield. All right, Section 3, how power shifted, the mechanics of change. So how did they actually enforce this new reality? The specific tools that changed the game were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, what we often call the Reconstruction Amendments. And listen, these weren't just minor little adjustments. They fundamentally gave the federal government powerful, unprecedented new constitutional tools to enforce civil rights and protect freedmen across the entire country. Suddenly, the national government was empowered to step into a state and say, no, you absolutely must respect these rights. But as we all know, simply changing the words on a piece of paper in the Constitution wasn't quite enough. People don't always follow the rules just because they're written down, right? So how were these new rights actually enforced on the ground? Specifically, what role did federal troops play in the South after the war? This is absolutely crucial to understand. During the Reconstruction era, federal troops were physically stationed throughout the southern states, and they were there to actively protect the newly established rights of freedmen. Just think about how massive a shift this really is. The national government was now taking a very strong, active, physical role in local state affairs. They were literally using federal military presence to ensure that states complied with national laws. It was a crystal clear demonstration that the old version of states' rights was over, and federal authority now had the ultimate muscle. That brings us to Section 4, why this matters today, the lasting impact on America. Okay, so here's a critical takeaway for us today. If states used to run themselves so independently before the war, why did the federal government need to step up and increase its power so dramatically? What was the real driving force behind this monumental shift on our federalism seesaw? The contrast here is honestly staggering. Before the war, states operated with incredibly high independence, but after the war, the federal government had to become the primary protector of civil rights. The national government essentially realized that it just couldn't rely on individual states to guarantee the freedoms of its citizens, especially formerly enslaved people. So the federal government stepped right in to fill that role, replacing the old system with one where Washington, D.C. held the ultimate responsibility for protecting fundamental human rights. Now, it's really important to note that while this intense level of protection with federal troops wasn't permanent at the time, it did do something absolutely vital. It set a crucial precedent. It established this brand new idea that the federal government can override states to protect our freedoms. It firmly cemented the reality that while states still manage a whole lot of everyday issues, the federal government has the absolute final say in enforcing the Constitution. This massive change strengthened national unity, even if it did spark those ongoing debates over the exact limits of federal power that we still see in our politics today. And finally, Section 5, Education and Biblical Morality, the HeroesMart Academy philosophy. You know, here at HeroesMart Academy, our Godly Learners series teaches a really profound truth. Just knowing the history of how laws protect us, it's just not enough. Education must be intertwined with biblical morality, because, quite frankly, education without morality is going to hurt you. Think about it. What is the point of being incredibly smart and knowing everything there is to know about the 13th Amendment and federalism if you just go out into the world and continue to make bad, immoral choices that hurt yourself and the people around you? True education has to shape the heart just as much as it fills the mind. I actually want to bring your attention to Romans 8:6-7, which promises true peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. It says, "The mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace." And this is exactly what we experience as we engage with these deep historical and moral truths. When we govern our minds with spiritual wisdom, rather than just raw historical data or selfish desires, we find actual, lasting peace and purpose in what we're learning. So I want to leave you with this final thought to really ponder as we wrap up today's explainer. We now know for sure that the federal government gained tremendous power after the Civil War, specifically to protect human freedoms. But if the government's role is to protect our freedoms from the top down, how do you plan to use your own internal biblical morality to responsibly exercise those freedoms from the inside out every single day? Remember, a truly strong nation requires both just laws and moral citizens. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you in the next one.